good day. This is a Ficus Petersii. I did another video. I've only done one other video on this. This was just a cutting that I had that actually was getting some long branches on there, get a little bit of character. I will, post that other video in the description, kind of explain why it was that I decided to go ahead and do something a little bit crazy with this guy. And obviously, this is kind of crazy here or whatever, but there's only one piece of wire on it. I took and wired that had this main branch coming off of the trunk here, and I use that for an anchor, and then I just have the movement in the long piece here or whatever. The wire is pretty much like right here at the trunk, embedded in there, and then down here towards the end it's really just kind of even still a little bit loose. This one is growing just super crazy here, and both of, or actually all three of the other ficus trees that I have like this, they kind of actually took a little pause so long in the winter that I was starting to get a little bit worried about them. I thought they might have been dying, but they're just now starting to get a little bit of growth on them, where this thing here just really has some explosive growth on it. And of course, any place like this branch kind of sprouted out, and that's about where the wire really stops biting in, right about like 2 branches up from that. And so this thick branch would feed from here down, and then this branch would feed from here down, or thicken from here down. So apparently that's what's been happening. Get the wire off first here. All right, and of course, when you let it bite in like that, it's keeping the shape actually pretty well, especially considering it wasn't biting in down here. Really am using this as an experimental tree. I mean, I had thought about maybe even today, maybe chopping that off there and letting this be like a new kind of like leader or whatever, but I don't think I'm gonna do that just yet. And one nice thing about, when they are cuttings like this, it is just free material for me to kind of practice with, experiment with, or whatever. This isn't even practice, this is a straight experiment here. Gonna leave that little bundle of growth there just to keep the sap flowing all the way through here. Some of these, I think that one is in a really bad spot. I really wouldn't want to save that at all. This one is coming out to the side, so I will prune that one off. This one, I think, because it was just kind of about where the branch was turning down, that was that really big one I was talking about there. I'll go ahead and just cut that down to just a couple leaves. Almost all of these I'm just planning on cutting down at least the growing tips off if I'm going to save them, but all the way down to just a couple leaves. That one, kind of in a straight up position there. I'll go ahead and take that guy all the way off. And then that's pretty much the main branch that I plan on keeping. These guys, I mean, I used this so that I could wire this one up. I would like the stump to get a little bit thicker there. I do want to take that one off. And then I don't, like, right now I don't want it to take off here. And I also don't want it to get, a knob there or anything. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off altogether there. And it's got these roots coming out of the bottom of the pot. This is the second time I've had to do this, where I've just cut those off. I was thinking about repotting today. I think I'm going to wait till I just revisit it again here soon. Now that I'm heading into summer here or whatever, I'll be doing a lot more work to my trees or whatever, but I'm going to go ahead and pull it up just a bit. Kind of break where all those roots were coming out of the holes there, and then turn it. And then now the roots can kind of find new holes there, and it won't become pop bound again so quickly, or it won't, get the escape roots again so quickly. I now have this sitting up on a pallet where it's not on the ground anymore either. I actually just pulled it up the other day, probably about 3 weeks ago, and just kind of trimmed those roots off and set it on the pallet so that it would stop kind of getting in like that, because I was planning on working it soon. It actually slipped my mind for a little while. I let the wire bite in a little more than I really wanted to. I mean, either way, if this doesn't, if this whole thing doesn't work out for me, I didn't cut the growing tip down there. That should continue to go like that. Even right now, and heck, I could cut it off right there and have quite a bit of movement and just grow a new tree right there. But since, I have a few of these cuttings and I already got a couple decent little trees out of these guys or whatever, I'm just gonna April 9th, and here today is May 7th, so it's been exactly 4 weeks. I decided to let it recover a little bit before I put wire back on it, which I'm going to do now after I pruned a couple of these. Right after I made the first part of the video there, but it did start shooting out of there really, really quick. So I went ahead and pruned them, and you can see it's back budding now and everything. So here's a good time to go ahead and get the wire on, but also just prune it a little bit. I wanted to keep a couple branches going up the tree. That one starting to get really thick. I don't want to take it over or anything. This one's in a bad spot. And then a couple of these I'll just take off. Just as they get further and further towards the end, they have a lot less vigor. One of the other things I've actually had to do since then quite a bit, I have left that growing tip on there, but I've had to defoliate it several times. We actually got a little bit of rain, and every time it rained, it would get weighted down. And the way I've got it sitting, it would get in the yard there, and just the ants would just attack it. Like I said, I just pulled some of that weight off, just so that it would kind of come up off the ground a little bit. All right, and there the wire's on there. I nearly went ahead and used this as an anchor and just wired from here out. But I did decide I wanted to go ahead and get the wires kind of crisscross from where the other bite marks were. And also, even though I've been thinking either I'm going to wind up chopping that off and just using this as a smaller tree, or chopping this off and using this as a literale or whatever, I've been thinking like maybe I could keep this and just have it in a little pad out here, you know, like just a smaller little branch that just happened to make a little pad out here, and then also had this other part. You know, from this side here, you can see this is basically a chop movement. That's where the old tree was. This was, if you go back and look at the first video I did with this was kind of a sacrifice branch that just kind of took off, and I decided I'd just try to work it into a design somehow. But anyhow, I'm going to get a little more of that kind of movement going there. And then try to take this. Last time I didn't have it quite so dramatically coming back in so close. I think I'd like to do something like that instead of having to go down below the pot. This will pick up with the sun, and once it regains a little momentum and everything, I noticed that specifically this type of ficus, whenever I kind of take and work it, it just gets kind of a little tired looking. I don't know if it's just from being worked, being pruned, whatever. I'm going to go ahead. Left that growing tip, but took all the weight off there. And then I might even go ahead leaving plenty of green out here. Sap flow should keep going. But since I did take all that off, I want to leave that growing tip and have that be the only growing tip out here. That'll probably make that take off again too. Alright, and I figured while I had it in here, I'd like to at least just take a peek at these roots. This is the original cutting that I took. It was probably about this size, like this branch coming off of it here when I took it at first. And it's just been in here in regular potting soil since. I actually had this sitting on the ground for a long time, let it get an escape root. That's actually how it sprung this. Kind of just let it go for a while. And then I pulled it up out of there, cut the escape roots off, and chopped it. And I've been kind of working it like this ever since. But I have peeked a couple times. It's a little one-sided. Probably I'm going to guess that maybe the escape root was over here. But it's also very solid. Solid on the bottom. And so kind of depending on what I see here, I might repot it just right back in where it was. do a drastic repot here, just have to kind of see what it looks like. Definitely is nice and solid across the bottom. Now this, sometimes it's hard to explain, but this is just a really good example on, if I would have had this in good substrate, this Debari would actually be in pretty good shape. But since I had it in this potting soil, and of course sometimes being in the potting soil is what allows the cutting to survive because it doesn't dry out so quick. So there's a little give and take there too. I took a knife and drove it up the middle and kind of split it a little bit before I took the cutting. Tried to see if it would give a wider base when it took root. And if this was good substrate, this all would have just fallen right off. There's a couple of good surface roots just coming out off to the sides. One main taproot there. Actually nearly worked out exactly the way I wanted to. Some of them are almost sticking up too much. Never would have thought that once I got down in it. But this was the one of the first groups of when I started doing that, when I started splitting it from the bottom. I've seen it work on a couple microcarpa. I haven't done this one. I haven't done this Petersii yet. So a couple roots, like these two, are kind of sticking straight up. This one's, you know, the tree kind of has a little skirt on it, if you will, where it goes from bark down in there, and that one's kind of sticking up just a little bit. So I'll take that one off. And then there's the bottom. And a couple of these that are kind of curling under there, I'm just going to cut them off so that when I get them in this new substrate, they'll go ahead and grow out. I was going to kind of do a little bit of a half repot in that I was going to put it right back in the pot that it was in. But I decided on one of my rectangular training pots. I already got some tie-dye wirings in there. Got a little bit of substrate in there. I'm not going to worry about pointing the front towards the rectangle end of it right now. I'm just really potting it just to improve the Debari. All right, got her tied down in there really well. Give you a look there. Really nice Debari on it. I'll be burying most of it, but it is still in development, so I should be able to uncover a little more. For the next repot, which theoretically should be at least 2 years from now, I would think, maybe 3. I'll probably wait about a year and see if I can take the tie downs, you know, off the root ball, just so that those aren't cutting in. And it should be nice and root bound in there then. Let it go for another year or so.